We all know the tales of wendigos and skinwalkers. However, there are stories of creatures that do not yet have a name. In today's video, I will be telling 3 stories of unknown, or lesser known cryptids. A huge thank you to the writers. Remember, you can send in your own story to rylhstories@gmail.com. If you enjoy the video, likes and comments are always appreciated. Subscribing if you're new is as well. Enjoy the video, and as always, I hope you all have a great night. Are you reading Dead Souls? The blonde girl in the subway asked in Russian, pointing at my book. I confirmed that I was. She smiled, immediately identified me as an American from my accent, and asked me if it was 19th century books that had brought me to Russia. I smiled back and explained that, in fact, they had. I was a PhD student in literature at NYU, and had been invited to spend a semester in the central Russian city we were in. The girl scooted into the seat next to me and introduced herself as Anna. She explained that she was an undergrad student at the local university, and that she loved 19th century literature, Dead Souls being no exception. We talked for a good 20 minutes, just about the book's main character, a disgraced official trying to get rich by deception. When the train slowed for my stop, she got up to leave too. We laughed at the coincidence as we got off. I don't normally do this. She smiled as we walked across the platform, and she pulled a bottle of vodka from her bag. She nodded her head towards a bench. Care to join me? It's not every day you meet a girl that likes the 19th century literature that you've dedicated your life to studying. I accepted. We sat down and started taking turns drinking from the bottle. She told me about her schooling and work. We drank, we talked, we laughed. And then I woke up, hours later, on the bench in the darkened subway station. I had a splitting headache. I was pretty sure she drugged me. I've drunk far more on other occasions, and not blacked out. Though how she managed it when we were drinking from the same bottle was beyond me. I felt her on my pants and jacket. Sure enough, my phone and wallet were missing. I berated myself for being tricked, though I had to admit, I'd never thought a thief would be so well read. At least she had left my books. Maybe she didn't like Dead Souls as much as she had said. I sat up. Except for the fluorescent light above the bench I had woken up on, the whole platform was dark, especially the tracks below, which only had dim, glowing red lights that led down the pitch-black tunnel. I got up and tried to find any exit I could, but I soon discovered that the stairs leading up towards the station were now gated shut, as were the ones leading up to the streets. Likewise, all the doors I tried were locked, even the employees' entrance and utility closets. After 20 minutes of wandering the platform, I was forced to accept that I would have to spend the night there. So, without any other options, I stretched out on the bench. How had the subway employees missed me when they closed up? I wondered angrily. Maybe they didn't get paid enough to care. For a long time, all I did was lay there. Since I didn't have a phone or watch, I have no idea for how long. I tried to read, but my headache prevented me from focusing. It was miserable, and it was cold. But eventually I fell into that state that is somewhere between awake and asleep. That's why I thought it was part of a dream when I heard the rustling. I pulled it up after a moment. I started to look around the dark, empty platform. What had that been? I couldn't identify the sound, or had I actually heard anything. Whatever had happened, my nerves were instantly on high alert. There wasn't an ounce of sleep in me anymore. So I was completely awake when the rustling sound happened again. My heart kicked into overdrive, and this time, I was able to identify where the sound was coming from. Beyond the edge of the platform, down on the darkened subway tracks. Hello? I called out. Of course there was no answer, just the echo of my voice down the tunnel. The small red lights on the track continued glowing dimly in the black. From where I was sitting, I couldn't see down onto the tracks. I knew I wouldn't be able to sleep until I could confirm that the sound was a rat or something. So I got up to take a look. I was stopped fast, however, by another rustle. And that's when I saw 3 fingers, long, gray, and silent, curl their way up from the darkness of the tracks below and quietly grabbed the edge of the platform. I don't know why I didn't scream. Shock, maybe. It's the natural response for most animals to freeze in the place of danger, and I think that's what happened to me. The fingers inched slowly forward, feeling around the edges of the platform. The long fingertips were so dirty they were almost black, and from what I could see, they had no nails. For a moment I thought I was seeing the hand of a homeless person reaching up from the tracks, but as I watched the fingers feel their way around the edge of the platform, I could see no humanity in their slow, calculated movements. But as much as the fingers had frightened me, that moment was nothing. Nothing, compared to when I started hearing the breathing. Sweet Mary above. The breathing. From just below the platform came slow, ragged breaths, being drawn steadily from dirty, raspy lungs, and with each inhale and exhale, a rustle. As I stood transfixed, the idea of running away finally made it from my legs to my brain, but it was instantly lost again as the thing started to pull itself onto the platform. Inhumanly long, emaciated arms slunk up from below, the gray fingers feeling, searching the ground in front of them. The labored breathing continued, and within a moment, the thing's face peered above the edge. Only it was impossible to actually see the thing's face. It was covered with a plastic shopping bag, which the thing seemed to be wearing like a mask, though it had no eye holes. Could the thing even see? Still, there was the source of the sounds. With every ragged breath the thing drew, the lower part of the bag moved in and out with a rustle. My brain finally retook my senses, and I took a step back. With a sharp intake of breath, the creature's head snapped in my direction. If it did indeed have eyes, they would have been pointed right at me. After a long moment, the thing reached out its fingers in my direction, and I saw with a flood of cold blood that it was feeling its way towards me. My instinct screamed, "Do not let this thing get a hold of you." Could it hear? Could it smell? I couldn't tell. But more importantly, could I run? Probably not. The platform was too small, and my instincts told me I could easily be cornered. The thing crawled closer. Inhale, rustle. Exhale, rustle. My mind raced. If I stayed put, I would soon be in the grasp of this thing. But if I took another step, I would reveal myself. The thing's fingers were now only a few feet away from me, and that's when I realized that I was still tightly gripping my copy of Dead Souls. An idea occurred to me. Wheeling back, I threw my book towards the other end of the platform. It landed several yards away with a smack and skidded for a few feet. The thing jerked its head in the direction of the book. I did the only thing I could think of. With nowhere to run and no closets to barricade myself in, I was hopelessly trapped so long as I was on the platform. So I dashed away from the thing, and I jumped off the platform and onto the tracks. The tunnel was my only hope of escape. I landed with a stumble, and it only took a moment to get up and running. Thankfully, there was a thin strip of ground on the side of the tracks, probably for maintenance workers or something. I sprinted as fast as my legs would take me, and within 10 seconds, I was in the tunnel. As I entered the darkness, I dared to steal a glance behind me. I turned soon enough to see a slender foot disappear into the shadows of the tracks. It was coming after me. After a minute of running, I was so far into the tunnel that I could see nothing except the dim red lights on the track next to me. I sprinted on. I could hear nothing above the sound of my own panting, but every once in a while, I thought I heard the rustling of a plastic bag. One time I ran straight into the wall as the tunnel curved. It knocked me down. Scrambling, I desperately kicked out, and I swear connected with something. It wasn't a direct hit, more like a glancing blow. My mind almost went blank with fear, but I managed to pick myself up again, and within a moment I was running again. I must have run for a mile, though I wasn't in the greatest shape. My adrenaline kept me going even if I couldn't keep up the sprint. More than once I sort of struck the edge of the tunnel with my shoulder as it curved. Never enough to knock me over again, but enough to slow me down. I eventually learned to keep an eye on the red lights to let me know when the tunnel curved. After an anxious eternity, I saw a light in the distance. A fluorescent light, just like the one I had woken up under. Sure enough, after a few moments I could see the edge of a new platform. I'd reached the next station. Would there be an exit there? Even just an open closet I could barricade myself in. I could only pray. Yeah, there was a bench and there was a man sitting on the bench. It was a subway employee. I could tell from the blue shirt he wore tucked in. "Hey," I yelled as I exited the tunnel. The man looked towards me and got up as I approached him. "Help, please," I said, coming to a stop on the tracks. I started to reach the platform when I heard the cock of a gun. I looked up. The man had a pistol trained directly between my eyes. "Away from the platform," he ordered, motioning with the gun. "You don't understand." I insisted between gasping breaths. "There's this thing that... away from the platform," he repeated coldly, his eyes narrowed. I backed up slowly. I took a look down the tunnel I had just run through. I could see no fingers, nor hear any rustling of plastic. But that could change any second. "I'm not going to hurt you," I said, arms raised as I backed up. The man chuckled dryly at that, but I ignored him. "Please let me on the platform. I've got to." "Be quiet, Mr. Clay," the man said. He began to kneel down. "How did you know my question was cut short, however, as the man began to tap his pistol against the edge of the platform. Tap, tap, tap. It echoed through the empty station as the man fixed his eyes on the tunnel. He knew. My stomach sank. He knew what was down here, and he was calling the thing. "What are you doing?" I screamed. "The Ministry of Transport of the Russian Federation thanks you for your contribution to keeping our subway system running and on time," he said in a rote voice. "And I'm going to tell you again, Mr. Clay, be quiet." "Please, I'm begging." He fired off a warning shot, and I jumped at the sound of it as it ricocheted off a rail. "Shh," the man said, putting a finger to his mouth. For a moment we just stood there in silence. My blood felt like it was 20 degrees. The thing was going to come, and I was going to die. "Why me?" was all I could say. "What?" spat the man. "You think you're special? We picked you at random. Good system for picking who is going to die. Very fair." I might have replied to that, but it was that exact moment that the soft crinkling of a plastic bag started to sound from the dark. We both turned our heads. Long, gray fingers were starting to feel their way out of the tunnel. It was one of those moments where time seemed to freeze. What could I do? The man was preventing me from getting onto the platform. But yes, the man's eyes were still fixed on the thing coming out of the tunnel. I did the only thing I could think of. I grabbed the man's legs, and with all the strength I had in me, I yanked him down. He swore as he started to stumble. I imagine he tried to aim the pistol at me, but it was too late. He fell off the platform and collapsed on top of me, as we fell into a heap on the tracks. The gun dropped, and for a horrible moment we were tangled. I couldn't tell if the thing was getting closer, but if it was attracted to motion or vibrations, we were making our fair share. After a moment, I managed to get out from under him, and I saw that he still hadn't retrieved the pistol, so I grabbed it. "No," the man began, but he was interrupted by the crack of the pistol as I stood up and fired it into the tunnel. The long finger started, and the slender arm momentarily reeled back, but for a moment, the thing continued feeling its way forward. The mask-like plastic bag started to appear from out of the darkness. The man screamed. "Bullets will not work on the Yazi schnick, but it doesn't like when we do that." Soon enough the thing's head came into full view. There was a bullet hole in the bag now. A thin stream of black had streamed through it. I had scored a direct shot. The thing crawled closer. The man laid there, frozen. Whether in fear or because he didn't want to reveal his location, I don't know. I myself was momentarily transfixed as the Yazi schnick, as he called it, continued approaching. And it was crawling faster. I regained my senses, took a step back, and stepped on something that jingled. The man's keys were on the ground, and I had stepped on them. The thing's head snapped towards me, and it began crawling faster. It already knew where I was. There was no going back. I reached down, picked up the keys, and started climbing onto the platform. "Get back here," the man cried in an almost panicking voice as he grabbed for me. "You will..." He had reached for me at the exact wrong spot. His finger had set off the trigger. The gun was yanked from my fingers, but I managed to pull myself up without any farther resistance. Once I was up, I looked onto the tracks. The gun had fallen to the ground next to the man, who was clutching a bloody stomach. The man groaned softly, but he did not flail. The thing continued feeling its way closer and closer. He looked up, and his face went white as he saw his fate feeling its way towards him. He tried to back away, but this just gave away his location to the thing. It approached faster the more he moved, its long fingers stretching constantly outward. Finally, the man grabbed the pistol. Damn, the last straw. The man screamed as he cocked the gun. In my heart, I knew what was about to happen, so I turned away. A shot rang out, and it echoed down the black tunnel. After several moments, I dared to look again at the tracks, and confirmed what I already knew. The man had shot himself in the head. Within a few moments, the Yazi Schnick finally laid its fingers on the man's body. For a moment, the fingers fumbled around the body, feeling the still warm but lifeless form. After a moment, the Yazi Schnick grabbed one of the man's arms, and I heard its rattling breath as it inhaled, smelling. It wrapped one hand around the wrist, and another around the man's fingers, and with a crunch and a squelch, the finger came off. The Yazi Schnick brought the finger to its face. It slipped its prize beneath its makeshift mask, and I could hear a soft, crunchy chewing behind the rustling of the plastic bag. For too long, I couldn't pull myself away from the scene. The Yazi Schnick had to have known I was there. My guess is that it just didn't care. It wasn't until it started on the second finger that I regained my senses. I ran to the gated stairs, unlocked them, and ran away from the station as far as I could run. The next morning when I arrived exhausted to the university, an administrator approached me. "My word, Clay, who did you anger?" he asked. "I just got off the phone. The Ministry of Transport is sending over some officials to retrieve you immediately." I took a taxi directly to the American Embassy, and 3 hours later was escorted to the airport and put on the first plane back to the United States. I swear, on the highest honor I can muster, that everything in this story is true, related as lucidly as possible. All true, no matter how badly I wish it wasn't. There isn't much to do in the rural parts of Pennsylvania, what some call Pennsyltucky, like some parts of rural America. Popular pastimes include drinking oneself into a stupor, and driving uninspected 1983 Ford F-150s double the speed limit down narrow, rarely maintained roads. I, however, occupy myself when I can by hunting. It gets a bad rap as a barbaric, cruel practice, but I've always found solace in the forest that is impossible to find in the cramped, too close for comfort atmosphere of a small town. This particular season, I was out in early November, in a forest in the foothills of the Appalachians, a few minutes away from my home northwest of Harrisburg. It was late in the fall season, and the steady flow of foliage tourists, that locals call leaf peepers, was beginning to trickle to a stop. Some trees were still burning a fiery red-orange, but most were beginning to wither, foreshadowing an unusually harsh winter. The falling leaves created a curtain of decay, which moved like a sandstorm in slow motion, shrouding and isolating me from my surroundings, and crunching softly under every footstep. I paced through the temple of red and gold, alert for the light footsteps of my quarry, white-tailed deer. My Winchester 30-06 swayed on my back as I walked. The gun was overkill for a deer, but it doesn't pay to take chances around bigger game like elk and black bear. This forest was new territory for me, a refreshing change of pace after paved trails and subdivisions began to encircle the hunting grounds of my childhood. As I walked, I began to lighten my guard, losing focus on the wildlife and becoming engrossed in the natural beauty of the area. I became so distracted, peering up at the falling leaves, that I tripped over a tree root snaking through the carpet. I followed it with my eyes to its termination at the base of a massive, gnarled oak tree. The trunk was huge, but the tree was squat, blackened with age, and split down the middle as if by an act of God. This story could have ended then and there, if not for a smell that wafted up to me as I passed the tree. It wound its way from the tree's base, out of a swale in the ground, to the raised path I was walking on, pushing the crisp smell of the forest aside. The first thought was that of a dead animal, which could mean bear in the area. So I circled the tree to take a look. There was no carcass, but the scene at the base of the tree resembled a homicide. Dark, matted clumps of fur, leading deep into the ground. The entire picture was punctuated by the same rank smell, a thick coppery scent like pennies mixed with death. I am not unused to gritty, even downright disturbing scenes, but this scent made me retch involuntarily, and the den unsettled me deeply, as though I had stumbled upon something no one should ever see. Shaken, I moved back onto the trail and, against my better judgment, resumed my search for a deer. The sun began to beat down overhead, with all the clarity of a winter's day, shining a demanding light on the forest and weakening my resolve. I had just begun to unpack my lunch when something began to bother me. I couldn't put a finger on what it was, but I felt antsy, for lack of a better word, like I shouldn't be sitting still. Without even knowing it, I began to scan my surroundings for something, anything. I was returning to my lunch when it hit me. The forest was silent, no birds chirping, no insects buzzing. Even the rustles of the trees in the wind had come to an ominous standstill. As the meaning of this realization began to sink in and I got to my feet, two things happened in rapid succession. A sizable branch snapped a few hundred meters away, and an ungodly screech penetrated the November air. I have never heard a sound like it, before or since. It's as though the earth itself split and hell opened up, just long enough to sum up the suffering of the damned in one ear-splitting roar. Terrified, I bolted to my gun, leaned against a tree, and began to scan the undergrowth. Something big was moving through the forest floor, but I couldn't see what it was thanks to the curtain of leaves falling around me. I hastily made tracks back in the direction I had come, forcing myself not to look back. After all, what animal would actively stalk a human without even being provoked? I had lost the sound of the creature and began to loosen up a little when I was hit with a bone-chilling realization. The sounds of the forest had come back behind me, but the trees in front were as silent as the grave. Whatever I had encountered, probably the same beast that made the mess under the oak tree, had circled back in an attempt to trap me. Truly scared at this point, I scrambled off the path into a rock gully, my back to a damp rock wall. I crawled without taking my eyes off the path into a cave, hoping to hide my hyperventilation and chattering teeth from whatever was stalking me. Only a few minutes had passed when I heard the crunch of leaves and a deep, demonic snorting. It stopped on the path above my hideaway, and I held my breath, willing my heart to stop so as to be completely silent. The creature had begun to move on when my gun, leaning against the rock, slipped off the slick surface. It clattered to the ground, reverberating louder than an air raid siren in the crisp autumn air. My heart sank as I heard steps make their way down the rocks and closer to me. I crawled painfully slowly towards my rifle, every muscle in my body tight enough to burst. I stopped to steady myself and heard breathing right outside the cave opening. It was choked, slavering breathing, unnatural breathing, which inspired visualizations of twisted corruptions of human and beast, a patchwork demon of animal and man. I reached for my gun, and came the closest to death I ever have, because as I outstretched my hand, so did it. Instead of the smooth shell-lock of my rifle stock, my palm met a coarse, ragged fur, caked with mud and attached to a lanky, sinewy arm. The beast screamed, and as I shouldered my rifle and fired blindly out of the opening, I caught a glimpse of yellowed fang and one blood-red eye, an eye that reflected a hatred more ancient than human, a hatred that said, "This is my forest. You have altered it through your presence, corrupted it, but I was here before you, and I will be here after." Human willpower paled in the face of such uncompromising malice, and I shrank back against the rocks, robotically cycling bullets out of the cave. I sat there, dead-eyed, doing this for a long time, overnight and well into the next morning, over 18 hours of working a bolt and pulling a trigger. By the time I snapped out of my adrenaline-fueled haze, my mouth felt like a desert, and my fingers felt as though they were made of canvas, stretched over dust. Shaking, I reached for my water bottle and gulped it down, spilling most of it down my front, Praying the beast was long gone, I inched my way out of the cave and ran as fast as my rickety legs would carry me the 2 odd miles back to my truck, leaving most of my gear behind. Nothing pursued me, but the feeling of being hunted remained. I drove back to town at 80 miles per hour on a dirt road, my eyes wide with fear, and my hands gripping the wheel with white knuckles. Unable to bear the thought of my secluded home, I spent the rest of the night in a motel with a bottle of cheap whiskey and every light in the room turned on. The thought of the creature would not exit my mind. Was it a demon, loosed on the earth by some divine mistake? Or just an animal? A cryptid lost to time, and the memories of the trees? I didn't really want to know, but I couldn't, and I still can't let it go. The fear eventually subsided, but as I sit at home, writing this, I swear, hand to God, that I can hear a howl echo through the trees and across the mountains, telling me that I may never rest, never forget. Hi, my name isn't as important as what I'm about to tell you. What I'm about to tell you is a warning to all those that may experience this. You may even survive longer than I have. See, I'm the last soul, human soul in my town that still isn't missing, dead, or reclaimed by whatever they are. I'll explain what I mean by reclaimed when it comes to that point in the events that have unfolded, but if you ever get as far into this that you start to see the reclaimed, then there is almost no chance you will survive. It all started around 2 months ago when this strange fog started to roll in, which was unusual for this area, and especially around this time of year. It was the middle of July in my small town that is nestled in a valley at the base of these 2 huge mountains that are covered by pine forests. The town sits with its back against the 2 mountains, sloped down and crossed over each other, like a horseshoe. You could only leave town by an access road that went through the forest and a small opening in the 2 mountains. It's about 6 miles from the front of the town to the opening in the mountains, but this fog was very strange. It just came out of nowhere. And the thing that made everyone uneasy about it was how the fog made you feel disoriented when you were in it. People would also start being forgetful. For example, not grabbing items that you would normally. But it got worse the longer the fog stayed, like parents completely forgetting that they had their kids with them and leaving them at the store. This happened the first 2 weeks, and the fog wasn't always there. It would be foggy for one day, and then the next, a beautiful mid-July. You were still able to leave the town at this point, so if this ever happens to you, I hope you catch it in time. I pray you leave. Just leave. Drive as far away as possible, and don't look back. If you don't, I'm sorry, but there is no escape. All you can do is know what to expect, and try to survive longer than I, and hope that there is an end to this. On the first day of the 3rd week, the fog will become a permanent part of your town, and the effects will grow stronger from here. The forgetfulness continued to get worse, to the point that I saw a mother completely forget that she had a son. Like, how do you just completely forget your own flesh and blood? The fog started to get thicker in short periods throughout the day. People and animals start to go missing during these times. The town put out a curfew and a fog watch for people to stay indoors. The watch was played over the local news and radios. It would be announced when the fog got thick. Sometimes you couldn't see 5 feet in front of you. The local authorities really started to take this seriously when some of the people that went missing started to come back. When the fog wasn't so thick, they would come walking back into town from the tree line. Every time the person would be mumbling incoherently and would be all beat up. They never remembered who they were or what happened to them. People that came back all varied in severity of their injuries. The worst one that I saw was this guy that worked at the gas station down the road from my house. He came walking down the middle of the street. His whole right arm was ripped out of its socket, and the left side of his face looked like it was blown off with a shotgun. His left eye was dangling from its socket, attached only by the nerves. He was still alive in that condition too. When it was clear enough outside, the authorities showed up and took the man to the hospital. He ended up dying on the way there. I found out from the news. It was at this point some of the town started wanting to take the chance and drive out, but they always ended up driving back into town. We ended up finding out by word of mouth that people who tried to drive out ended up driving for hours in a straight line and ended up right where they started. There was one guy who says he and his friend tried it. He said what would have been halfway out of town, he had to take a piss. So he had his friend pull. While he was pissing, his friend drove off without him. Man, was he pissed. In more ways than one. His friends completely forgot he was outside, not even 10 feet from the car, doing his business, and just left. He sure as hell wasn't going to stay there in the middle of the road, so he ended up walking back to town. When he got there, his friend's car was in the middle of the road, and nobody was in it. But while he was walking, we had a fog warning to stay inside. He said he could see fine. Walking back, it didn't get thicker for him at all. What really unsettled a lot of people is that he claimed he felt watched almost the whole time on the way back. He said he kept seeing thin figures in the fog that were as tall as the trees, and he only got a glimpse of them before losing them in the forest. After he started seeing them, he started hearing this low drone, something like radio or TV static while walking back. It stopped when he got to opening and saw his friend's car. After hearing what happened to him, things only got worse. Around this time, people who were missing started showing up dead all around town. Authorities tried their best to clean up when they showed up, but with the fog getting increasingly thicker and more frequent, some of the corpses wouldn't be moved immediately, and then the bodies would disappear. A lot of them were grotesquely mutilated. They were also found in all kinds of places with no explanation. One appeared hanging from a power line along the road, like it hung itself. Its stomach was cut vertically to the lower part of its chest, and its intestines were spilling out. Another was found headless, sitting upright in the pews of the church. 2 days later, another one was found at the same church, but impaled by the cross of the steeple, going through the man's back and up through his right arm. They were never able to get that one down. It disappeared 3 days later. It was only a week of the missing person showing up dead all over town, and it became clear to everyone that we are to just stay in our homes and hope for this to pass. That seemed to work for a day with nobody going missing, but that's when everyone started to see the tall figures walking through the fog. You could only see the faint black silhouette against the stark white canvas of what was left of our town. The farther we got into the week, the more we started to see, and the closer they came to our houses. People learned to keep all the lights off after they saw the figures were seemingly drawn closer to one of the homes with all the lights on. The figures broke into one of the houses through a big living room window. All anybody could hear was the screams of the family, and then all the lights went out at the same time. The silhouettes emerged from the same window they entered from. Then, almost in unison, all the houses on that street turned their lights off. The figure began to start walking down the streets again. It became quickly apparent that these things were responsible for the killing of the people that went missing. These creatures were unnaturally tall. They towered over people, and stood about as high as a one-story house. Their arms and legs were elongated and looked like blades. Their heads were shaped like a large upright brick, attached to a neck, and they all had horns that protruded out, and then straight up at a 90-degree angle on both sides of their heads. You could tell how close they were to your house by how loud the static got. I had a close call with one a few days ago, actually. It was the day after we found out that they will break into your house if they see light. I was in my living room, on my laptop, documenting what happened the day prior. With my back facing against my room window, I didn't realize the blue light from my laptop was shining so brightly. I only took notice when I realized that the white noise I was hearing wasn't white noise. And I saw the silhouette of one of those things standing right in front of the window. It was so tall that I could only see the lower half of its body. After a week, the creature is just roaming around in search of any light source. That's when the ash started to fall and the fog went away, but the shadow stayed. The newfound visibility that the town found itself in let us see what truly we were hiding from. These creatures. They looked as if they were made of concrete with gray, rough skin, and a body that looked solid enough to stop a moving car with no trouble. They had a single big yellow eye that really wasn't an eye. It looked to be just a drawing of an eye, almost like an Egyptian hieroglyphic. Their arms looked just like giant blades. With the new weather, it was almost a relief, but we all knew that none of this was good. We tried to see the brighter side of things, like the town being able to see again. Except that was a very fleeting relief, due to the fact that we could now see those things in their full terror. It was long before the reclaimed started to show up. I guess this is a good time to tell you what exactly the reclaimed are. The reclaimed are the bodies of the dead that couldn't be recovered. They came back about a day after the ash started to fall. They had this blue light glowing from their eyes and their mouth. The reclaimed would just walk aimlessly around the town, waiting to be approached by a loved one or someone that recognized them. Crazy as it is, you would think that people would be smart enough not to go outside and try to help them, especially if they already knew they were dead, but people still did. I don't know if it was from people just being delusional, or if these things made them come to them, but when someone approached them, they would grab onto the person's shoulders and stare into their face mouth wide, and the blue light that emanated from their mouth and eyes would start to get brighter and brighter. The light would fade, and they would both turn to ash and add to the surplus already falling. I can't even begin to explain how many people I've seen go out and get turned to nothing more than a pile of ash by their loved ones. But it's been enough to make me believe that I'm the last human alive in this godforsaken... Something else to note is that those tall creatures never bothered anyone that tried to approach the reclaimed. They would just stand by and watch it unfold in front of them with their drawn-on eye. It's been 2 days since I have seen anybody else in the town, or even any of the reclaimed. The creatures have been making their way to the center of town. The atmosphere feels really, really wrong. I think something big is coming, and I'm afraid of what it might be. This is my warning to all who read this. If your town has an unexplained couple of foggy days, then it might be in your best interest to move, in hopes of never experiencing what happens after the fog decided to stay around.